I'd like to give you an update on the Kalashnikov Sicilian. So here we go. This is a game played in the World Blitz Championship just a few days ago. Ivan Cheparinov from Bulgaria against Adhiban Baskaran from India. Adhiban is quite an exponent of the Kalashnikov. So here we go. That's the Kalashnikov. This familiar pawn structure here, and this knight slightly wayward. Now, before we get into the detail of the game, I should say that pretty soon, just out to the opening in the early middle game, the game reaches a really critical position where black has to decide on a middle game strategy. And it's very typical for this opening. So at that point, I'm going to get you to think about what you'd like to do. So let's move on. Now, Cheparinov plays c4. So he's going for this big clamp on black's centre. And this and knight c3, these are the most popular continuations. But okay, let's go with c4. Now, Adhiban plays g6. And this is the line that I recommend in my course, my chessable course on the Kalashnikov. And I think this gives black really interesting dynamic options, putting the bishop on g7, because there is potential to put the knight on d4, among other things. Knight c3, so now white threatens to put the knight on d5 and come in here. So that's why black has to push the knight back to a3, not the best square anyway. Bishop g7. And now I think really white ought to continue redeploying that knight with knight c2 in order to cover the d4 square. But Cheparinov plays bishop e2. And that gives Adhiban the chance to put the knight on d4, menacing the bishop on e2. Well, Cheparinov doesn't seem bothered. He just plays bishop e3 and pressurizes the knight on d4. So now that knight has to exchange itself off. But that is actually quite nice to grab that light squared bishop, even though you might think, well, it's not a brilliant piece because it's sort of slightly locked in by its own pawns. Actually, that light squared bishop is a really important piece because it does defend those that pawn center with e4 and c4. So that gives black greater counterattacking chances. When you play against a Marozzi bind, somehow you have to find a way to break it down. So rook c8 attacks the pawn on c4. Now already white has to be a little bit careful. You know, if you play a move like b3, and this is absolutely typical, now you can see that knight is undefended. So b5 is possible, just exploiting that pin. So that's why Cheparinov, back in this position, plays knight d5. And here already, this is simply very good for black. You can take on d5. Adhiban didn't do this, but this is very strong. And if e takes, well, we get this lovely kingside pawn majority. And white's queenside pawn majority isn't really going anywhere. But this is really gives black considerable potential to attack on the kingside and in the middle. And if, let me see, c takes, then black can attack this pawn straight away. And how does white defend that? Queen d3, then knight f6. You can see f3 isn't possible because of the pin. And this pawn is just dropping. And, well, black has a winning position. So bishop takes knight would have been stronger. But Adhiban plays knight f6. And now bishop b6 attacks the queen, so the queen moves up. Knight takes f6, bishop takes f6, and now b3. So in putting the bishop on b6, you can see that, well, physically black is restrained the b pawn cannot advance to b5. Queen c6 attacks the bishop. Queen e3. Now, this is a key moment in the game, the one I mentioned at the start, and absolutely typical of this opening. Even though, you could say this whole line isn't theoretically very important. As I pointed out, I think black could just be better in that position by taking on d5. But this is a very typical kind of position where black is, well, not quite out of the opening yet and has to decide what to do. And it's important to recognise that this is actually a critical moment in the game. So I'm going to have a quick slurp of tea. I'd like you to have a good think. How do you play here with black? I'm not looking for just one move. You need to have a think what happens next. The danger here is if black continues in a very routine way. So for example, if you castle, white castles. And now you can see the bishop controls d8. You can't use your normal breaking move b5. You certainly can't play d5. So how does black gain any play in this position at all? White is threatening to play a rook to d1, knight to b4 into d5, or perhaps just double on the d file. If black attempts to push the f pawn, which is, well, a very popular strategy, let's put it like that, but not always a very good strategy in the Kalashnikov. You have to think very carefully before you advance your f pawn, because it can just weaken the king. Then white would exchange. Now if bishop takes, then knight b4, knight comes into d5, just controlling those pawns beautifully. And if g takes f5, again knight b4, and this very important move f4, so that just blockades these pawns. And if it advances, then that just weakens the d4 square. White can double on the d file. There is pressure here. That's a very unpleasant position for black. So I don't like this strategy in this particular position of advancing the f pawn. And yes, in this kind of position, well, what can black do actually? It's very, very difficult already. So routine moves don't work. I do like bishop g5, so this shakes things up. The queen is defending the bishop, so this basically just goes for an exchange. And after castles, queen c6 attacks this pawn, makes way for this one. And b5, and black has counterplay. So if knight b3, you can exchange and then castle. And you can see this is an isolated pawn. Well, there's potential to attack these pawns as well. Yes, the d6 pawn is also potentially vulnerable. It's about equal though. It all balances out. So that's a very steady way to play the position, but I think a very decent way to play bishop g5, and that's a typical idea that I highlight in the course. I call it the breakout bishop, the bishop coming out from behind this pawn chain, breaking out to a good diagonal, in this case forcing an exchange. But, well, quite typically for Adhiban, he's a very enterprising player, fearless player. And he takes on c4, sacrifices a piece. So he's got 2 pawns for the piece, but he's prevented white from castling and gains a tempo because the knight is attacked. And if knight here, then queen b4 check looks very unpleasant. So rook c1 and castles. So, in his own way, Adhiban has broken down white's pawn front, got rid of this Marozzi bind, but he's had to sack a piece. But white is under pressure. Now remember, this is a blitz game. So you know, what happens next? Well, you know, there are loads of blunders from both sides. But that's Blitz for you. I think the important thing is that black has the initiative. And, well, in any form of chess, the initiative is really important when you put pressure on your opponent, but especially so in Blitz when you get this momentum. Now here Cheparinov makes a mistake straight away. He should play Queen e2. So looking to castle. But after Queen takes a2, now that's 3 pawns for the piece. Certainly black has sufficient compensation here. So bishop g5 forces this exchange. I mean, white's pawns are not very beautiful here. And just b5. So black has 3 pawns still for the piece. And pretty good play on the queen side as well. Just looking to advance those pawns, and at some point these will be vulnerable as well. I can't say it. Good grief. Yeah, good compensation, that's all you can say. But instead Cheparinov played Queen d2, and this is just an outright blunder. He blunders a pawn. Queen takes e4 check. Well, more than a pawn. I mean, his whole position has collapsed now. So that's how many pawns? Let me see, 4 pawns for the piece now, and, well, a crushing attack for black as well. Not that the game runs smoothly from this point. I mean, it should simply be winning for black, but, well, let's see what happened. So Adhiban keeps the queens on. Good decision. White's king is in the middle. Looks weak. Black's king is very secure, so why not keep the queens on? Exchange of rooks, and here there's a winning move straight away. Queen h4 check with a simple double attack, picking up the piece on b4. But d4, Adhiban was on a roll, and rook c8, still of course a crushing position for black. As another pawn drops, so now that is 5 pawns for the piece. And here rook c2 is winning instantly. The checks run out very quickly. Black's king can hide on, well, let me just show that. Rook c2 absolutely crushing, threatening a mate, and the checks run out very quickly. The king can just step up to h6. But h6 played, just pushing the queen away. I guess it was instinct to push the queen away and then start the attack again. Queen d8, pushing the knight around. King g7. So Adhiban is just playing absolutely securely, just playing, you know, rock solid chess and hoping that his pawns are just going to push through, which they do. And now he opens up the king again and brings the rook in, and it's still absolutely winning for black here. f5. a5, and here, yeah, it's best just to keep pushing those pawns, and actually, you know, the endgames are going to be winning as well. But b4, and here things start to get a little bit tricky. You can see that queen has got an open window into black's position here, and now the best move is to play h5, just to give the king a little escape route. But Adhiban played a4, and after rook e2, that was probably unexpected, then things aren't so clear, because if queen takes knight, then black's king is suddenly suffering. You know, there's no escape route here. So it starts to get a little bit tricky now. And again, if the queen moves to the side, then, well, black gets counterplay here. Excuse me, white gets counterplay. So Adhiban played f4. And here, white should keep the queens on, and it's still rather tense. But Cheparinov went for the endgame. And yeah, it's still 4 pawns for the piece, so should be winning. Well, it's not quite so clear now. King f7 should be played, but d3 played instead. Rook e7 is a good move. but rook d2 played, too passive. And here, this is, well, finally, this is actually winning. b3, Adhiban makes the breakthrough. And a3, and that was the end of the game because one of these pawns is going through after this. a2 and d2. There you go, it's a queen. So, okay, that was a bit of a rough ride for the last 20 moves or so, but basically it was just a winning position for black, and I think justice was done in the end. I think just coming back to that key moment in the game, this really is a critical position, and it's so typical of the Kalashnikov. There often comes a moment when you have to decide how to break out. And sometimes you can do that with maneuvers, like here, bishop g5, sometimes with a pawn break, sometimes, you know, with a b5 or something like that. And here, Adhiban went for a piece sacrifice. But the important thing is to identify when that critical moment comes. When do you just have to develop and play routine moves, and when do you have to break out and play something that's daring, like bishop takes c4 or, you know, bishop g5. Just coming back a little bit further to this position. In fact, curiously, Adhiban had this position in a game from the World Rapid Championship a few days before, and his opponent played f3 instead of Cheparinov's bishop b6. And this is actually worse because after this exchange, then black has the two bishops, and they're pretty powerful. So the game went e takes. If c takes, then, well, already that looks quite unpleasant. Black has counterplay on the queen side, potentially b4, but also, in this case, f5 looks pretty good. You know, that's just a tremendous King's Indian, and you can see how that pawn could come under severe pressure. But the game went e takes d5. And now Adhiban just broke out with b5. And already white is under severe pressure. This knight is a very poor piece, actually. And you can see there's pressure here and here as well. Yeah, very nice. And those two bishops look really potent. So there we go. The Kalashnikov is still something, a force to be reckoned with. And the chessboard course, unbelievably, I think it's still on Christmas sale at the moment. So if you're interested in that full repertoire and lots of model games, then do check it out. I'll put the link down there, but the course is on Chessable. More coming from the World Rapid and World Blitz. I think that there are some amazing games played, so I really want to show you some more from those tournaments. Thanks for watching.